Welcome to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. My guest today is Gary Seligson. Thank you for being here, Gary.
My pleasure, Clayton. Thanks for having me, man.
I got a question for you. Where are you from? Are you from New York?
No, I'm from West Orange, New Jersey,
Oh, really?
which is about 2 miles maybe from where I live now.
Aha. Do you have a lot of family out there?
No, not anymore. My parents have passed away. So interestingly, I wound up here because it was a place we wanted to, when we moved out of New York City, we wanted a place that was like an hour or less commuting in, because my wife at the time was doing a 9 to 5 gig in the city. The thought of going any further than that was impossible for her. And of
What
course,
got you?
me working in town, I wanted to be close to. And South Orange, Maplewood, a lot of people know. There's a lot of Broadway people out here. It's a good place.
Do you see a lot of Broadway people when you commute to the city?
I really do. It's probably about, on any given night, there's probably 25, 30 people on various trains that are making that trip, maybe more.
Wow.
A lot of stagehands, some actors, some musicians.
What got you into playing drums? Did you always, some of my colleagues that are older than me or as old, because I'm old, they playing on pots and pans. Did you have some kind of inspiration? Like, what was the thing that brought you to playing drums?
I was the quintessential kid that pulled the pots and pans out of my mom's kitchen cupboard and was playing on the floor they gave me wooden spoons, and I was really doing that. And that's how it started. And my father noticed that I was into it. And so he bought me a metal toy snare drum. It was tiny, like maybe 4 or 5 inches metal, and a pair of wooden sticks. I can still picture this. I think I went through one, and then he bought me another one. I decked the hell out of him. I would play it all the time, just like banging the drum. And there was a series of other drums that he bought for me. Over the years, I probably started banging on things at 3 or something like that, maybe.
Wow.
And then it progressed from there. My dad definitely nurtured it. He's not a musician, but he loves music. He loved music. And he nurtured it. Whether he realized he was going to turn me into a professional musician, probably if someone would have told him, hey, you better quit this, you might become a musician, he never stopped. I don't really know. Maybe not. What happened was he kept buying drums. Then there was like a little paper cardboard kind of drum set I got for a birthday one day, and it took an hour and a half before I went through the heads of those. Right. Then eventually he bought a Kent blue snare drum with a stand, and I started taking lessons. And the way that came about, his job was as a TV repairman. One of the things he did, and he made the fatal error of telling me one day that one of his customers is a professional drummer, and that guy lived in West Orange, where we were from. And so I was 6, I believe, at the time. He told me that in the summer. And from that point on, I kept bugging my dad. I said, Dad, when can I get lessons with Mr. Dramatsky? I kept asking him. His stock answer was like, I was going to 2nd grade. His stock answer was, okay, well, you're going to 2nd grade, but when you go into 3rd grade, you can start then. And I think he was testing to see if I was really going to be interested at that point. And I bugged him so much that what happened was I talked him into letting me start going into 2nd grade. And so so check this out. This is Al Dramatsky. And what my father said was, I went to his house, and there's a picture of this guy playing at the White House with this orchestra. And I was like, that was all I needed to hear. So fast forward. So I talked him into it. I went to the first lesson, and Al Dramatsky had just retired. His ace student, Glenn Weber, who you may know, took over Mr. Dramatsky's teaching practice. So Glenn Weber at the time was probably about 26 or something, 27. And that guy, Glenn, who's my good friend, taught me from 2nd grade all the way through 12th grade.
Wow.
Many years studying with Glenn. Eventually, Glenn moved to his own teaching studio. He got Mr. Dramatsky's students, and then he went. And Glenn Weber, I owe a lot to him because he really just kept me on the right track, prepared me for the little things I was doing in junior high school, kept my interest. Eventually, there was all city and all state, and then there was region jazz band and all state jazz band. And
Wait, so
eventually,
tell me about this All-State thing. How did it work in your town as far as did you play in bands in like junior high school and like what?
yeah. So I started playing once I was taking private lessons. When I got old enough, I remember a little orchestra in grade school. So probably like fourth grade or something. I was already playing drums in a little orchestra. And so it progressed from there. I kept studying with Glenn Weber. And eventually Glenn Weber said, there's this thing called Region, North Jersey Region Band you can try out. And what they do is they divide the state into three different areas, north, central, and south. And music students can try out to see where they get placed. And so I got placed in, pretty high all the time. And so I was in region band playing, in the percussion section. And as I got older, I heard about the jazz band, which was very select. And I made the region jazz band and I auditioned for Allstate. I did not get the Allstate Jazz Ensemble, but I got to play drums in the North Jersey Regional Jazz Ensemble, which was amazing. I learned a lot. I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm in way over because, was I really setting up the figures like Buddy Rich, like people I heard play? No, but I was getting through it and, trying to hold the band together. And I think that skill that started there playing, and I played in jazz ensembles in junior high school. There was one in high school. The schools were not very big, but I got some experience.
Did we play in any rock bands when you were young?
Yeah.
Original rock bands or cover bands or what?
Yeah. Again, I was really lucky playing. So what happened when I was 13, my brother, who's 6 years older, had a friend his brother was a trumpet player in a band in a neighboring town, a band that played like Chicago, the band Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears. It was a horn band. Right. And my brother heard from his friend that his brother is looking for a drummer. And so Ken, my brother, mentioned me. I was 13. So I went to that. My mom drove me to this guy's house. It was a band with two trumpets, trombone, saxophone, bass, guitar, drums, keyboard, like Chicago, bass. And they liked me. They were in high school. They were about 3 or 4 years older than me. They liked me enough to keep me in the band. That was my first experience. And so we would rehearse like every week, just jamming. This guy had a basement that accommodated that. And we would rehearse these Chicago tunes, like 25 or 6-4 and Make Me Smile. And of course, I was trying to learn this in my lessons, everything. And then what happened was that band really didn't do any gigs. It was more like a rehearsal band situation. I think we did about 2 gigs, may or may not have paid any, like a beach party once and something like that. But one of the guitar players at one point in that band, who was 4 years older than me, had a little quartet that he used to play kids' parties. And he asked me, Steve Kaplan asked me, hey, do you want to do this? It actually pays money. And I said, well, of course. Okay, great. I'll pick you up, you and your drums, and we'll go to and what was popular back in New Jersey and where I'm from at that time, this is in the 70s, late 70s, were bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah parties. That's when Jewish 13-year-old boy or girl, they have a celebration when he becomes 13. And what was in vogue those days was that the kid would get to have his own little party with his friends, and the parents would have a big party with the kid and all the relatives. But these little throw together parties would be put together. And the band that I played with was a band that used to play those parties. So the point being, at age 13 and 14, 15, 16, all through high school, I was playing these gigs, and we'd have up, by the time I got out of high school, I was doing like 2 or 3 gigs a weekend sometimes.
Oh, wow.
My other friends would be like, where's Gary? What are you doing tonight? And they'll be playing poker or something. I'm like, sorry, I got a gig. I'm not going to be,
Wow, you were working really young.
I was working. And believe it or not, Clayton, from that gig, I met a guy whose father was a country music dude who was a yodeler. And he used to play, I'm not kidding, Idaho Ed. And he asked me if I wanted to play in Idaho's band. Idaho would play at VFW halls for like firemen's balls and things like that, square dances. So when I was like 16, 17, I was playing these gigs also with them. So point being, I had a lot of experience playing, holding a band together, doing these things in a professional way. I wasn't making a killing, but I was getting paid, and all that time playing for people dancing really allowed me to feel fairly comfortable making a band feel comfortable, I think. Looking back now, all these decades later, I know that was really helpful.
Did you further pursue your education after high school, studying
Yeah.
music?
Yeah. I went to Hart School of Music
In Hartford, all right.
in Hartford.
I'm from Manchester.
Chris Yankee was there a few years after me. Yankee was there at the same time as John Clanton.
Ah, wow, small world. Now, why'd you choose Hart and not Berkeley or
I
North Texas
auditioned,
State?
right? I auditioned at the time at Glassboro State, which is a New Jersey school. I got in there. I auditioned at Eastman School of Music. I did not, I got waitlisted there. That was a scary audition. I did terribly. Got
Mm.
John Beck. I'm sure he's a masterful guy, but he completely intimidated me. I played okay. I got waitlisted. And then a Hart School of Music. And the reason I knew about Hart was because I was playing in a community orchestra locally, and the percussionist, timpanist in that orchestra, I was talking to him about potential music schools for me, and he said, "We should go to think about Hart. I just got out of there, and Alexander Leapak is the main teacher there, and he's incredible. You'll have a great time there." So I was like, "Okay, Hartford's not nearby, you know." And I auditioned for Leapak there, and from the moment I met Al Leapak, he was like the coolest dude I'd ever seen in my life, and he was in the '60s at that. He had like a corduroy jacket on, he used to carry a cigar around, not lit, but
He had patches on his elbow too.
well, no, he was cooler than that. Dark glasses, you know, he was bad boy. And he was
Mm.
he's an amazing, he passed away maybe 15 years ago. He was an amazing teacher, an amazing composer. He played great jazz drums, excellent timpani. Emil Richards, percussionist, is an old friend of Leapak. Actually, when I got to Hart, I decided to go there, and I learned like in the first month that Jeff Porcaro, well, first of all, Joe Porcaro is from Hartford. You probably know this, right? Did you know
Uh,
that?
I didn't know that.
You know this story? This is an amazing story. Hartford, Connecticut was the home of Alexander Leapak, and his two students that were really famous were Joe Porcaro, who's Jeff's father, who was in the LA studio scene forever, and Emil Richards, the percussionist, a mallet guy. They were both, the three of them were in the Hartford Symphony together. They were fast, they were all friends, and both of them studied with Leapak. When I got to Hart, I learned that, wait a minute, Jeff Porcaro's father, Joe, was from Hartford, and Leapak, I believe, is Jeff's godfather. That's how close they were.
Wow.
So all that blew my mind. You know, Hart was a great place for me. So I was playing a lot of jazz at Hart. And it's not as big as Eastman School of Music. It's certainly not nearly as big as North Texas. It's a pretty small program. When I was there was probably about 20 percussion majors, maybe 15 actually. The other 5 or 7 of them were education majors. After like 2 or 3 years, I kind of became a big fish in a small pond, meaning that I was playing in the jazz ensemble. I was playing with Paul Jeffrey, who had like a bebop jazz ensemble. I was playing a lot, and I was playing with a lot of friends of mine who are now great jazz musicians, professional, Saul Rubin and other people. And I think at one point, and I was taking Jackie McLean, who used to teach jazz history classes. Jackie knew me, you know, it's a small building. At one point, Jackie says, "Hey, Gary, what are you doing tomorrow at 4 o'clock?" I was like, "Nothing. What do you need?" And he said, I want to play with you. I'll meet you. Which one of these practice rooms is yours?" And I point to it. And he's like, "Okay, I'll meet you there at 4 o'clock tomorrow." Okay, that's weird. I didn't really think that much of it because I was so busy with school. And so the time came around. I was like, wait, I'm meeting Jackie in 20 minutes. I'm going to go play. He has his alto with him. We walk in, he closes the door. And I don't know. Yeah, I think he just started playing. You know, he's an amazing, masterful, iconic jazz legend. He used to sub for Charlie Parker. For those anybody listening who doesn't know, when Bird couldn't make the gig because he was strung out on heroin, they used to call him Little Bird. All
Ah,
this. He was with Mingus. He was with, Jackie McLean. Yeah. Is responsible for Jack DeJohnette getting with Miles, Tony Williams getting with Miles.
ah.
He was known for finding drummers. So he was like, let's check out what this guy's all about. Anyway, we played for about 25 minutes. I wish I would have recorded it. Of course I didn't. And that was it. He didn't hire me for his band. Nothing like amazing came out of it, except it was absolutely thrilling. And when he left the room, I was like, holy shit.
Cool.
Because it was like jamming with Coltrane, basically.
It's so interesting. Now, speaking of drummers and Jack DeJohnette and Tony Williams, who were some of your influences growing up? Who'd you look at when you were in your teens in high school and in college?
Yeah. I've always had a really wide variety of tastes, and I've done a lot of different stuff, like different styles of music. People that come to mind, because I did a lot of big band stuff, Sonny Payne, Basie. That guy I really, really, really loved. And there was a record live at Birdland, Basie at Birdland, or Basie live at Birdland. That, he's a major one for me. I was mystified by the way he played. Could set up the band and keep it so exciting and like dynamics from high to low all the time and just swinging is awesome. Yeah, he's one. Steve Gadd, absolutely. When I was in high school and college, it was all about Steve Gadd. He was playing with Chick Corea's group. He was on everybody's records, Tom Scott's, as you know. So Steve Gadd was a major influence for me. Jeff Burkhardt, there's many people, man. And through the years, it's changed. But when I was in college, Hartford is about 2.5 hours from where I live in New Jersey. Whenever I was home, I was a real jazz head during that time. I would always go to the city. I'd get the Village Voice, which was the local paper, and find out who was playing where and go hear these guys. So I heard in the same room many times Elvin Jones. I love Elvin Jones. I heard him many times. Billy Higgins. I love Billy Higgins. Art Blakey, many times. So I'm coming from there too. Like that's a big part of who I am. Those are people that come to mind. As I got older, when I was on the road, I used to drive around the country and I had a CD player and I'd have these long drives. And so I would listen to CDs. And one drummer on the Bonnie Raitt records, and I really loved it. It's got Tony, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Branigal or something. He's on Nick of Time and the one after that. But, the way they feel, the way the music feels. I love John Robinson on the live Rufus and Chaka Khan record.
Oh, man.
I'm sure that blows my mind. What a record that is, man, So there's been so many.
After you got out of college, did you say, you know what? I want to play Broadway musicals?
No. Not really.
What did you want to do after college?
Although if you would have asked me, I would have said, sure.
Was that even on the radar back then?
Minorly. I had been to a couple of Broadway shows as a kid. My parents, we went to 2 or 3. Very expensive even back then. But then my dad was into that. And so, I saw a couple and he pointed out to me, look, see those guys down there in that hole? That's the orchestra pit. See, he's by the drums. That's the drum. So my radar, he enabled me to notice this, and I never forgot that. That always fascinated me. These days, as you know, it's such a shame because a lot of times pit is covered with black and we're not seeing it all. That room, but I digress. So what happened to me, I went to Harvard. I had this amazing education with Lee Pack, where I played a lot of percussion. I was a percussion major. I played a lot of difficult modern classical music. I played a lot of jazz, small group, a lot of big band stuff. At one point, I was in 5 different big bands. 2 of them played professionally. Played gig. The Valley Big Band, we recorded. We played all over town in Hartford and up in Amherst. And the other one was Al Gentile, which is Al Gentile's band, which is like a society band. They played like Glenn Miller kind of stuff. So then there was a reading band, which this guy Chick Cicchetti's an arranger. Maybe you know that name. Remember the 880 Club? You ever go there? Jazz Club in Hartford?
Oh my God, yes.
I think it's 880 Maple, right? On Monday nights.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Anyway, so I was doing a lot of big band playing, which also I know helped my playing. Point being, so when I graduated Hart, I was like, okay, Leapak has connections in Los Angeles. A lot of his students were playing the film music and TV music in LA. And some of his students had gone there. And so I thought, well, I could either go to LA and try that, or go to New York, or go to Nashville. I didn't know anybody in Nashville. I didn't want to go to LA. Somehow in my brain, I thought, I really love jazz music. And if I go to LA, I'm going to be missing all that straight ahead acoustic jazz music. I didn't know if I could hang as a jazz musician in New York, but I knew that I loved that music, and I knew that there was a greater concentration, that style of bebop, if you will, like modern acoustic jazz. I knew there was more of that in New York. So at the time, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go to New York first. So that summer, I was living in Hartford, and an article in Modern Drummer came out where there was an interview with Gary Chester. Gary Chester was a studio drummer, kind of a contemporary of Bernard Purdy's. He was a white guy, kind of like Hal Blaine of New York. And I read this interview with this guy, and he really turned my head around, because he was all about the studio scene in New York. And something clicked in my brain. It's like, you know what? I think I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go home and call up Gary Chester, see if I can get on his list, and maybe through him, I can work my way into the studio scene in New York. That was in 1984. And at that time, drum machines were coming along, and the studio scene was going out the window. Eventually, he took me in. There was an opening, and I studied with him for about a year. And he really helped me in a lot of ways, made me think completely differently about the drums. He has a really ambidextrous approach. I'm a natural lefty, but I always play drums righty. So for me, when you study with him, everything you do left-handed, you do right-handed, all these interesting methods of learning how to play the instrument in a completely new way for me. Anyway, about lesson 7 or 8, every week I'd go to his place, and after like the 5th, and he would say to me, Gary, what'd you do this week? And I'd say, well, I played for this musical, Pirates of Penzance, where I played the Mallet Book. Do you know the show? He goes, well, yeah, I know the show. And I was telling him about the Mallet Book and how difficult it was. And it is a really difficult mallet. He's like, okay. And then I would tell him, I did this gig on drums and that thing. And he always wanted to know. And one day, after about 8 lessons or so, he said, man, you're going to have to figure out what you want to do. Do you want to play percussion, or do you want to play drums in New York? Because what's going to happen to you is you're going to get on a gig, and it's going to be like a high profile gig, and there's going to be contractor there, and you're going to be playing percussion, and he's going to say, oh, you're a percussionist. And then if you try and tell him, well, I play drums too, he's going to be like, yeah, okay, I've seen you're a percussionist. So Gary Chester's advice to me was like, you have to make a decision. And I did make a decision that I wanted to play drums because I preferred it. And part of me felt really good about, okay, now I don't have to practice marimba anymore. I don't have to worry about all these notes. And so it worked out great. But you asked how I got into Broadway. So shortly after that, after making that decision, one time I went into a lesson, and he stopped the lesson. He said, okay, you ever think about playing on Broadway? And I said, well, I guess I've thought about it, but I don't really know how to go about it. He said, okay, here's what you're going to do. My student, Howard Jones, he has a Broadway show right now. I'm going to tell him that you're going to call him, and I'm going to tell him to put you on his sub list. I'm like, what? Wow. Like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. My lesson was like on Tuesday. He said, you call Thursday. He call Howie on Thursday, because I'm going to see Howie tomorrow. I'll tell him. And that's what I did. I called Howie. Never met him before in my life. I said, Howie, Gary Seligson, I'm Gary Chester's student. And he says, oh yeah, Gary Chester told me about you. I don't have any room at all. But if you want to come watch the show, you can sit next to me and watch the show. If it's something you think you can do, take home the book, learn the show. At some point, I might need you. That's what I did. Okay, so this is a good story.
I'm wondering if he ever used you, but go ahead.
Okay, so I went to watch. It was The King and I. The way it was set up in the pit was he was at the drums here, and the stage was where was in front of him. He was looking directly at the stage. And I don't remember the theater. I want to say it's a Broadway theater, but I don't know. And he was high up, and the stage was not that high. So the lip of the stage was right in front of him. Where I watched where I watched Howie was facing him underneath the stage, right? So he's playing here, and I'm watching directly opposite. And I watch the show, and he says, "Okay, you want to learn this?" I'm like, "Sure. Here's the book. Call me when you have it down." And I was fresh out of college. I was studying with Gary Chester, doing all this ambidextrous wild shit. I was like, "This is not hard. I can learn this." I learned it. I called him in a couple of weeks or whatever it was, 3 weeks. He said, "Okay, great. I don't need you, but just know that one day I might call you on a Tuesday to play Friday night." And I was like, "Okay." About 4 months went by. He called me on Tuesday because that's how he does it. He calls, he gets the snubs in the beginning of the week. He said, "Can you play Saturday night?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." So from that point, of course, I was like, "Holy shit, I'm going to do this." He said, "Okay, good. Why don't you watch Friday night again? And then it's your Saturday." I'm like, "Fun." Watching Friday, I'm like, I can do, I knew the show at that, I thought.
Oh no.
So yeah, ready? So Saturday rolls around, and at about 5 o'clock, it's an 8 o'clock show. At about 5 o'clock, I enter the pit. And the other one had just ended 20 minutes before. And I'm thinking, okay, this is, I got 2 hours easy to relax, get used to his drums, blah, blah, blah. I climb up on his drums. I sit down at the drums. First of all, he sits about 1.5 feet higher than I do. At that time, he did a foot higher. And the book for King and I is a lot of 2-beat stuff. It's kind of orchestral. It's beautiful symphonic music. There was a set of bells, I think. There was some wood blocks, a set of bells, and a small drum set with like an Indian tom-tom, Chinese tom-tom. So I sit down at the drums. I'm like, "Oh shit, this is really high." And then I go to play the bass drum pedal, and the pedal was so tight, Clayton. To this day, I've never felt anything remotely that tight. I'm like, "Holy shit!"
That was the first time you played his drums?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Which is a valuable lesson for everybody to listen. Anyway, so I'm flipping out at this point. I'm like, "Holy cow, this feels nothing. Everything is so different. I'm a foot higher. The pedal, like I have to play quietly, like a piano or mezzo piano, just feathering. Everything was like difficult." And then what happens next is the worst part of it. So I'm about 4 minutes into playing, and I'm not playing loud, I'm just touching stuff. Bing, bang, boom, 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 ting, just to see where stuff is. And I hear the pit door opens in front of me, right? And this woman comes out. She's a dresser. She looks at me. She's completely mad. She's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm Gary Seligson. I'm going to play drums for the first time tonight for." He goes, "You can't be here now. People are sleeping.
Yeah, I was about to say
You have to leave. You come at 7:30.
Oh my God.
Clayton, for the next hour and 45 minutes, I walked around Midtown getting more and more nervous with every step I was like, I was losing my mind. I know the show. I've learned the show. I can play the show. I'm on my game. It'll be fun. Next thing that happens at about 2 minutes to 8, the conductor comes through that same door. He looks at me. I'm like a little kid. I'm like 25. He's like, "Who the hell are you?" It's Saturday night on Broadway, and freaking Neil Brenner is the star of the show.
Man.
Dig it? So he comes through, and he looks at me. He's petrified. I never met him. Now I know. Maybe if you have an opportunity to meet the music director, you should say, "Hi, just so you know, I'll be here Saturday night, Gary." Just to get anything going on. Anyway, he looks at me. He keeps walking. He's on the podium. Next thing I know, basically, he's tapping the baton. It's like we play an overture. And I'm like, I got through the overture. It was an out-of-body experience for the next 2 acts. And I got through. Everything was cool. I made the cut.
Okay, good.
But when Neil Brenner came on stage, he was like right in front of me because the lip of the stage was probably about, I don't know. He's pretty tall and he's wearing this regal red suit. All the lights are on him. King of Siam, and he's in front of me. I wasn't prepared for that either. And he looked at me with like his cold, steely eyes, like, if you mess up the show, dude, you have your head. I was getting all this. Anyway, it was trial by fire at Clayton, and that's my first show. That was my first experience on Broadway, and I learned many lessons.
Number one, meet the musical director.
Well, no, I would say number one, every time from that point on, anytime I subbed the show for somebody else, I would say, can I just, while I'm watching on the break, I would ask, can I just sit here for a minute? I just want to feel where things are so that I know when I go home and put the kit together, I know what I'm up against. I know what it's going to feel. It's like driving a car and you can't move the seat or you can't move the mirrors.
Right.
It's just like that, man. And yeah, that was number one. Number two is if you can somehow, it's all about, one of the things for me, I've learned through the years, it's all about making sure people are comfortable, making the band feel good, especially making the music director feel like you're paying attention to him.
One of the many questions I have coming up.
Okay.
Son, that was your first time subbing, which is something interesting, which I always ask people, like, what was it like subbing on your first show? A lot of people may not have necessarily subbed, but that's one of the many stories that I hear.
Right.
That was in, what year was that? Wow.
I think it was 84.
What, did you sub at any other shows after that?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. That happened, and I never played the show again. I don't know why, but the word got around really fast that I was successful there, and I immediately started subbing for Tom Oldakowski. At that time, Radio City Music Hall had a summer Disney show, and I started subbing for Tom there immediately, like weeks later. Nobody wanted to hire me. I mean, well, Tom was one of the first people I called before I called Howie, actually, because Tom went to Hart also.
Oh, wow.
So when I got to New York, I called Tom right away. I said, hey, man, can I sub for you? And he's like, he was kind of putting me off. But once he knew I was successful for Howie, then all of a sudden the gate was open for Tom. So I played a bunch of shows at the music hall, which was completely different because there everything's on a click.
Wait, so he's doing that show since the 80s?
What was the question?
You talking about Radio City Music Hall, right?
Tom has finally left about 2 years ago.
Really?
Yep. But for a long time, they stopped having the summer shows, so it would only be the Christmas show. But he held that chair for, I don't know, decades. Great drummer. I love Tom Oldakowski. So I started subbing for Tom. And then after that, Howie had gotten Little Shop of Horrors. I guess King and Not closed. Little Shop of Horrors was downtown in the first theater on 2nd Avenue there. And I subbed a lot for him there. I subbed at Radio City. Those were the two. And then I got a call to go on the road to replace somebody on the national. It was a bus and truck tour, a national tour of On Your Toes, a show called On Your Toes. The drummer who was on the tour was more of a percussionist, and there was some big band stuff happening, and they weren't happy with that aspect of it. So they needed somebody really quick. So Red Press, who I didn't know, called me and said, I got your name from blah, blah, blah. Can you go out of town? And at the time I was still studying with Gary Chester. And it sounded great to me, like 20 cities over the course of like 14 weeks or something like that. And I said, yeah, man, I think I'm interested. I would love to do this. And I went to my lesson the next day and told Gary Chester, who every week he'd ask me as I showed up from LA, so what's new, man? What'd you do this? Expecting for me to say, well, I have a jingle date with, Coca-Cola this week. But instead I said, actually, I got a call to go on the road with the show for 14 weeks. I'm really excited about it. And he freaked out. Gary Chester freaked out. He's like, you can't leave town for 12 weeks. I'm like, what? It pays 3 times more than what I'm making now. At the time I was playing a lot of club dates, weddings and bar mitzvahs and society gigs all over town, schlepping my drums in and out of kitchens, in the hotels, double parking your car, bringing the drum deal in a tuxedo in the tri-state area. I loved it. It was a good band. I did a bunch of it. It's fun. But here, all of a sudden, I have my own Broadway show, in effect, and there's somebody else is bringing the drums around. I'm just set them up and play in Scranton for a couple of nights, and then we go to Milwaukee, and it's on a bus. The whole thing sounded great to me. And Gary Chester was like, don't leave town, never leave town for more than 4 weeks.
Wow. Why?
I've already told him yes. He said, no, I don't think you should take it, man, because if you leave, so here's what his point of view was. He was a studio guy that used to work sessions from like 10 to 1, 2 to 5, 7 to 10, whatever, 3 or 4 a day. And once you get on the list of radio, once you're on people contractors list of someone that can do the gig, you get there's that much work. And he was grooming me and his other students. For the problem was drum machines had come along and all those jingles were now being done by machines, which he didn't really realize, I think. So his advice was, Gary, if you leave town, when somebody calls you and they hear you're out of town, they're going to go on to the next person. You're going to miss your spot. And I was like, I haven't done any of this work, and here's $1,400 a week, plus per diem or whatever it was, and I'm done playing hotels. This is great. So I went against his will, in a way. Not that he was holding me to the fire, but his recommendation. And he told me, he said, "Man, here's what's gonna you're gonna," and he loved me as a student. Sorry. He said, I think what's gonna happen is you're gonna do 12 weeks, and you'll see. It's gonna turn into 6 months. It's gonna turn into a year. Going to turn into a year and a half, 2 years. Well, guess what, Clayton? After the 12 weeks, they extended they tacked on Toronto for a month and Detroit for a month. So suddenly it was 8 more weeks. And I had to call up Gary and say, Gary, I'm not going to be back because you were right. And my last week, second to last week in Detroit, I got a phone call from a friend of mine from college, John Hahn, who was on the road with Dreamgirls. They were about to go to Japan. Percussionist was leaving the tour, and John was like, "Hey man, we're going to Japan. Are you available? Do you want to play percussion on this?" And I think the drummer's leaving in a few months. You can move over to the drum chairs. What, Japan? And I was like, "Yes, I'm going to do it." So point being, I went on the road with that show. Right on your toes, that wound up being, it went from 12 weeks to about 20, and then immediately, seamlessly into Dreamgirls, which was 14 months, including Japan. Then came to New York to play a little stint at the Ambassador Theater. They thought it was going to be a stop on the tour, but we got such a slamming review in the Times. And at the time, the New York Times critic was all powerful, Frank Rich. He gave us such a great review that the show was running for 6 months. So after being on the road solid for 2 years, Clay, I came home to my own Broadway gig on percussion, playing Dreamgirls.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy? And then, so that was like another year. No, I don't know how long ago. I think a year or so. And then, so that closed. That was my first Broadway show.
Dreamgirls?
Dreamgirls playing percussion. It was the revival of Dreamgirls.
Oh, wow. Who was on drums back then?
At that point, it was Steve Singer. Before that, it was, Wally Gator. Did you know Wally?
I heard the name.
He's great. He was Lionel Hampton's drummer for a long time.
He's kind of a big guy, right?
Big guy.
Yeah, I think I met him once.
He's such a great drummer and a sweetheart. He was the original drummer. When I got to the tour, he was the man. And then he left, and Steve Singer took over. You know Steve Singer?
Yes.
Took over on drums. And so I would sub on the drum book on Broadway. But my chair was a lot like the Motown chair. It was vibes, percussion, vibes, timpani, tambourine. It was just one percussionist.
So what year was that?
That was 87 when it was on Broadway. 86, 87 on the road. So it was On Your Toes, 84. No, 85. It was 85 basically into 86. And then Dreamgirls 86 through 87. Then Dreamgirls closed, the tour stopped. And at that point, I thought I was done with Broadway. I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I was in a rock band called Chillers. We were trying to get a record deal. Never did. So we never got a record deal. And I tried to I didn't want to play on Broadway. I thought, I want to be more of a rock. I want to be more of a drummer. Broadway seems, I'd been playing percussion. I was like, in my brain, my twisted way of thinking when I was 26 or something, I was like, let's leave this alone for a while. Until one day I got a call. I was living in Jersey City, and Mel Rodman, who was the contractor, who was contracting Cats, and then Les Miserables and Miss Saigon. He had all the Andrew Lloyd Webber, Cameron McIntosh shows, which were huge. He needed a drummer to do one of the Cats tours. He said, "Do you want to go on the road?" And I said, "You know what? I do. I just bought a car. I had enough for the hotels, the rock band, nothing was happening. I wasn't subbing. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Solid money, my new car. It was national tour, so it was at the time at least a week, or usually 2 or 3 in a city. I loved it. And I did a year of Cats in 1988. And then the drummer on the Les Miserables tour had to leave. The same contractor was hiring for both tours. I called Mel after a year of the contract and said, you know what? I heard Gary Tillman is leaving the Les Mis tour. Do you have anybody for that? And he said, as a matter of fact, I don't. I said, well, do you mind if I move from Cats to Les Mis? Because I love being on. And I did that. That I wound up doing for 5 years. So at that point, it was a year of Cats, 5 years of Les Mis. I met my wife after about 3 years. We got married. From there, Miss Saigon tour opened up, and I went from Les Mis directly to the Miss Saigon tour, which was doing even longer stays. I was on the road for 9 years solid.
Wow.
A year of Cats, 5 with Les Mis, and 3 with Miss Saigon, basically. And then I came home. So when Gary Chester said, you know what, Gary, if you leave town for more than 4 weeks, you're going to be gone for a year or maybe longer. You know what? He was right. First it was a year and a half. Then I was home for a year or so. But I came back with a Broadway show. I was home for about a year and a half. And then I went on the road for 9 years with my car, always driving around. I loved it.
Wait, you did the tour? You drove yourself? Really? Wow.
Because a few of the guys on Cats, they used to travel the whole band. So there was like 18 people in the band. Out of those 18 people, there was probably 12 or 14 cars. On the Les Mis band, we had 21 pieces in the orchestra. Everybody drove, I think. 19 people drove. You could do it because, we'd play Kansas City, and then they'd have to load this whole giant set for a day and a half into the trucks, and the trucks would go slowly, traverse the country, and I'd be like, I'm leaving at 7 in the morning or 9 or whatever time. I'd just drive from Des Moines to Indianapolis or Indianapolis to Portland, or whatever it was, I would do it. Sorry, you asked.
When you toured a lot, do you have favorite cities in the United States?
Oh, good one.
Your top 5 favorite cities.
Oh, wow.
Things have changed really from the 90s to today.
At the time, I loved Portland, Oregon. I loved Seattle. Portland had a great music scene. I loved the Portland coast. I had my car, so I could, days during the day when I had time off, I'd be a little bit adventurous, and on days off, if we were there for a few weeks. So I'd go I love the Portland coast. I love the jazz scene. I love the music scene. I love the way the people are there. That was in the 90s. I loved Seattle for similar reasons. I love San Diego for the weather. I know you love that too.
Yeah.
I love Austin. Blows my mind. Nashville, the music scene in Nashville is amazing. Those are some cities that come to mind.
So you came off the road to do a show in New York?
No. Okay, so in 90s, my dad died in 96. I stayed on the road for about another year. And after my dad died, my mom was here by herself, and I was like, you know what? In the back of my mind, I was like, I've been traveling for, better part of 9 years on the road. Maybe this is enough. And all these years, I was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go back to New York? Am I going to relocate to LA? For a long time, I thought I would just move to Hawaii, seriously, and just play jazz, like get a trio gig, and just because I love to swim. And I was a vegetarian. I was like, why not just move to Hawaii by myself? Really healthy lifestyle, play jazz in a trio or whatever, and live there. But so my dad died, and I was like, you know what? I got to figure this out. First stop, New Jersey. Maybe I'll check out here. And Clayton, I'm not kidding you when I tell you that the phone rang as I was pulling in the driveway. It was Bob Billig. Chicago, the show had just opened up, and Bob Billig was the conductor and supervisor on Les Miserables. So he knew me pretty well. He knew I was coming home. He's like, are you home yet? And I literally pulled in the driveway. And my mom comes out and she says, Gary, there's a phone call for you. Somebody's on the phone, Bob Billig. It's the second word she said to me after, I'm so glad you're home. I said, okay, Bob Billig. I pick up the phone and Bob says, when are you coming home? I'm like, well, I just got home. He said, well, we need a sub at Chicago. Are you interested in doing this? It'd be great. And I said, well, yes. And
as a matter of fact, yes.
So it snowballed from there. I learned that show. I learned Lion King. That was really pivotal.
So when you were, what was the show again? The first one, Bob asked you to sub?
From Les Miserables. I met Bob on Les Miserables. He was the supervisor on that.
What did he ask you to sub on again?
Chicago.
Okay, Chicago. Did you go and get on the drum set and make sure the pedal wasn't?
Hell yeah. Yeah. That's the first thing I did. Ronnie Zito's great drummer.
I haven't met him yet.
God,
I should reach out to him.
you should, because he's legendary. He's an iconic New York drummer. Did a ton of session work.
Hmm.
He's a beautiful musician. God, so great. His brother is Torrey Zito, who's famous for a lot of arranging with Sinatra arrangements and other things. That's his brother. But Ronnie is equally famous, equally a dynamic, incredible musician.
That's cool. You did Chicago and started your name, I guess, got back around and started some other shows. And how did you wind up? We brought it up earlier, the Gershwin's Fascinating Rhythm in 1990.
Well, that came from me subbing at the Lion King.
Ah.
Because Cynthia Cortman was the keyboard, was the associate conductor there, and she asked me if she had the show Fascinating Rhythm. She was the musical director. She knew that it was coming in. She asked me if I'd be interested in working there. Of course, I said yes. And she said, yeah, it's going to be a Broadway show. And I was like, amazing. So it was very short-lived. We played a few weeks. It wasn't well put together. It was basically different arrangements of Gershwin tunes, and they tried to cobble this. It really wasn't even a story. It was a review. It's called Gershwin's Fascinating Rhythm. And it was it the Ambassador Theater? No, I don't know what theater it was. Anyway, so yeah, it was the Longacre Theater. Basically, it was a review of famous Gershwin tunes, sung and danced really well with great cast. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't a high budget. It wasn't enough to sustain it.
Did you do workshops for your next show, Aida, or did you wind up getting into that some other way?
Well, I was really lucky, Clayton. So I started subbing in Chicago. Then I literally ran into Carl German, who was the associate on Lion King at a deli. I just gotten home. He said, "You're home? Well, why don't you come sub Lion King?" And I told him, you know what? I'm not going to. Lion King had just opened up to like rave reviews like crazy. And I knew everybody in town was going to call Tommy Igoe to try to get on the list. So I was like, I got to learn Chicago. I'm not even going to go there. I know I'm going to sub at Cats and Les Mis and Miss Saigon, because all three of those shows I played and they were all still open. And I had a chance to sub at Rent. So I had my hands full. I was like, I've got enough. And I was talking to Carl in this deli, and lo and behold, Tommy Igoe walks into the deli. And so I had met Tommy years ago. And Tommy says to me, dude, what are you doing, man? You come learn the show. What are you doing tonight? Literally, Clayton. It was Saturday between shows. And I'm like, well, I guess my black clothes are at the studio, the music building. I go get them. Go get your clothes and come watch me. I'm like, okay. An hour and a half later, I'm sitting next to Tommy, watching him throw down his book. And he says to me, okay, this is how this is going to work. The show is a gigantic hit. As you know, we just opened. I know that I have a bunch of dates that I'm not going to be here for. I have a couple of subs, but I'm telling you right now, whoever learns the show that Joe Church really likes is probably going to get a lot of work. That's all I needed to. That night, I went home and started transcribing everything that he played. I wrote it all down, everything. And he plays a lot of notes. I love Tom. He plays a ton of notes. I learned it all. I went and played a show, and he was like, Joe was really impressed. And so I started playing there a lot. And then fast forward, you asked how I got Aida. I was subbing there a bunch, a couple times a week, probably for a couple of months. And Cynthia asked me if I wanted to work on Fascinating Rhythm. Around the same time, unbeknownst to me, Michael Keller, the contractor, had called the conductor of the Lion King, Joe Church, and said, who do you like on drums there? He was a good sub for Tommy. And Joe said, well, there's this guy, Gary Seligson. This really sounds great. And my phone rang, the next day. It's Michael Keller. So I have this show, and it's Elton John, and it's Disney, and we're going to Atlanta for a couple of months. Would you be interested in working on this? And I said, of course. He said, well, really, you want to leave town? I'm like, for that? Yes, of course I want to leave town. The timing was such that I could do Fascinating Rhythm. At the same time, it was called Elaborate Lives. The timing was such that I could do both of them. I did the short run of Fascinating Rhythm. Nobody knew it was going to close so fast. Then I went to Atlanta, and we started the pre-production work, and we went to Atlanta for the show called Elaborate Lives. They closed that version of it. they fired the choreographer and the director, and the new choreographer, this gentleman, Wayne Salento, wanted to start working right away. And so I got called with Jim Abbott and dance arranger, and we started rehearsing. It became Aida. Basically, that's what happened. My career kept going from there.
So Aida was the first time I met you because I had done I had gotten a call to work on a show called Footloose, which was
Yeah,
the
of
bus and
course.
truck tour
Right.
of that show. I didn't know anything about Broadway at all. So I
Right.
was like, I don't know if you were the first person I called, but you were the first person that allowed me to come in and watch you play. And I
That's
was
great.
fascinated. I was like, what the hell did I get myself into? Because you were doing all kind of stuff in that show, and I was like, I
A
don't even know
lot.
if I can hang. But I thank you for allowing me to come in
Oh
and
man,
watch you
I hope.
play.
Yeah, glad I did.
You helped start my career on Broadway. And speaking of shows that have started many different careers, you left Aida, or did you? Like, how did you get to Wicked after Aida? Like, did you?
Okay, so the same guy that was the choreographer on Aida got hired for Wicked, and so one day Jim Abbott, he and I wound up getting dance arranger credit on Aida because it's so much, yeah, so much work on that. And Wayne Salento, the choreographer, really loved working with Jim and I. So when Wicked was his next project, he asked us if we would be interested in working on that. And at the time, nobody knew what Wicked was going to become at all. It's just another project. So I was like, sure, of course. That was 2002. So we started working on it with him. And I, at the time, in the 2003 area, Aida had opened in 2000. So it was about 3 years plus into the run. It was kind of winding down a little bit. And Wicked was clearly becoming something incredible. So that's when I decided to leave Aida to do. It was a lateral move for me, go from one to the other.
Did you do a lot of work originating the book or drum
Yeah,
part?
yeah.
And was that something that you went out of town for?
What happened with Wicked was we started quietly working with him and his choreographer Wayne and his assistant, with Jim Abbott and me and Wayne and Corinne Fadden for weeks, a week here, a week there. They were trying to come up with choreography, and Wayne's and Stephen Schwartz, composer of Wicked, his instructions to Wayne Salento and Jim Abbott became the dance arranger for the show was that he wanted the music, besides his own music, his own two, beautiful melodies and songs. He wanted the dance music to sound something other world, some other worlds. So at the time, we were trying everything in the world. We had some loops going, and we were trying all kinds of crazy things. And we spent weeks working on stuff. Was weeks of that. And then at some point, they did auditions. They put a cast together, and then we did a cast rehearsals where Jim and I were there playing. Actually, Jim was not playing the cast rehearsals. Alex Lockamore was playing as keyboard one player and associate, and we were playing the rehearsals with the cast. And they were grooming the cast to go to do the out of town, which was in San Francisco. And Michael Keller, the contractor, told me right away, he's like, "Look, I can't take you out of town to play drums because in San Francisco I have to use the local drummer, and you're not going to get the gig." And I said, "Okay, that's fine." Aida was still happening, so it didn't really matter to me. So I was fine, and I continued to play Aida, but I knew that Wicked was really something special. The cast is incredible. The music was beautiful. It was so intense. The story was so intense. There's so much of my own stamp in it in a way. So at one point during the run of Aida, when they were playing Wicked in San Francisco, I flew myself out with JetBlue to San Francisco to watch the show. I was like, this is worth it to me because I needed to find out if I wanted to do the show or not. I had an open invitation to play the show when it came back to me. So do I leave Aida and play Wicked, or do I hang with Aida? So I went to watch Wicked in San Francisco, and from the moment Belinda comes down in the ball or whatever in the beginning of the show, people around me were like gasping. They were completely in it from like minute number two. They were enthralled with the show because it's the prequel to The Wizard of Oz. Everybody knows the backstory. Everybody's fascinated. Kristen Chenoweth is so amazing and funny and witty, and Aida was spellbinding, and the thing is incredible. Joel Grey was amazing. So I was like, well, this is going to be a hit. I immediately knew. I was like, okay. So I told them, yeah, actually, I want to do the show, and that's what happened.
So I talked to Bill Lanham and Matt Vander about Wicked. I asked Bill, I was like, why is it so, everyone that I talked to is like, Matt, God, Wicked's so hard to play. And Matt was telling me that the way you described it to him, I think, was Bartok meets Metallica.
What I meant by that, Bartok being a modern classical composer whose music is very passionate and intense and sometimes difficult rhythmically and harmonically. You have to be on your game to play that and be very precise, play it to the nth degree. There's nothing Broadway showy about that kind of music. And the Metallica aspect, well, some of it gets kind of heavy rock and intense and angsty. And I was playing some of those songs you have to, because No Good Deed, that song, and some of the others, it's full on rock. I mean, everything I could give to it, it would take. And the drums actually, the drums that I was using in the pit at Wicked was a thin shell 4-ply maple pearl, gorgeous drums. But I remember hitting them so freaking hard and thinking, man, I am topping these shells out. Like, I can't play anything more into it because it's not going to sound musical after that. And I never felt that way with the drum set before. But some of the music in Wicked made me play that intensely. So, Wicked is really all over the place. There's the quietest little finger cymbal and triangle things. You want to be so delicate, and it's chamber music like, you're playing pretty flute and oboe maybe and strings in 1 minute, and somebody's crying or emoting. The stakes are very high theatrically, and Bill Brown's orchestrations in that show are gorgeous. So, and then there's times when you're playing with a lot of brass. It's a big orchestra, 23-piece band, 2 trombones, 2 French horns, 2 trumpets, 4 woodwinds, 3 keyboards, bass, 2 guitars, drums, percussion, and a string quartet.
Wow.
The way he orchestrated it, he really uses the orchestration. Specific moments call for specific little ensembles. And there's a lot of that going on while the intense emotion's happening on stage. Sometimes I'm like throwing down, playing rock. Sometimes it's poppy. Sometimes I'm playing brush ballad tenderly. Sometimes it's finger cymbals. Sometimes it's bombast, tom-toms, or timpani. There's some electronic weirdness. There's some weird sounds on a pad. A lot going on.
So Bill Brown, speaking of Hart School of Music, he was Chris Yockey's mentor, correct?
Yes.
That's why I think I heard his name from. Now, Wicked came out, and, I looked back at the reviews, and everyone was like, this is the worst thing. This is terrible.
The reviews are mixed, and nobody really knows why.
Now, it's interesting how back then, views were supposed to be.
Yeah, it was a little bit pre-internet, almost 2003 when we opened.
Yes. Well,
not pre-internet. It was the beginning in a way, right?
Clearly they were wrong. They've lasted a long, Wicked's still around and still selling out. What do you think it was about that show that made it have such staying power?
A couple things. First of all, most people know the backstory. Most people know the story of Wizard of Oz. It's something that speaks to them. So here's the thing being presented as a twist on the story, and big time, and also a prequel. And I think people were immediately, you go into the story realizing, oh, wait, I'm kind of interested in this because I've never seen this as a kid. There's some gorgeous music. The actors, the original actors, Kristen Chenoweth, they were incredible. The costumes are gorgeous. The set is really wild, cool. It kind of has everything. There was a famous line that Joe Mantello, the director, said when we first opened. He said, well, at least you know where your $150 is going. So you see this opulence and you're getting this spectacle. Really, there's nothing casual about it at all. From the costumes to the story, to the performances, to the music.
Now, musicians in general don't leave shows, especially hit Broadway shows, because we're like, all right, I'm going to stay here. At least I got a job. It's solid. You took a leap and you left and you did Tarzan.
That's why I left.
Tell me more.
We were playing Wicked, and then we were about 2.5 years into it. I'd been with the show. Basically, I'd done about a year pre-production, maybe in about 2.5 years of the show. And one day I heard Disney, who I worked with, was producing Tarzan. And I said, well, who's playing drums? And I kind of put in for it and was offered the job, basically. The way I was offered the job was, at first, I was very interested, and I was able to do a 29-hour reading. So they did it like with a big budget. So they assembled a small cast, and they had microphones set up on mic stands, a PA, in a room at 42nd Street Studios, a rhythm section. And so I was asked to do that because it was a similar, Paul Bogabe was a music supervisor, and was a musical supervisor on Aida. So he allowed me to do this. And of course, it's Phil Collins' music. I love Phil Collins. He's definitely a major influence on me. And I jumped at the chance, of course, and I could do it during the day. And I thought, well, if I wind up at the gig, amazing. And if not, it'll be an incredible experience. So I do the 29-hour thing. I hear the demos, and Jim Abbott was involved also. He was going to MD it. And I said, well, how do I go about this? Because Phil Collins' demos were laden with 10 tracks of percussion basically for every song. Because it's Tarzan and it's in the jungles, and there's a lot of percussion. Like, how do you want me to do this in the room? And I say, well, just do whatever you can. So I had a drum set and I had a drum cap. And on the drum cap, I had his samples. I put a bunch of, I had access to Phil's samples. So I put up what I thought was important. And somehow no percussion. Somehow I was able to play the percussion stuff in the top of the tune. And then when it morphed into the drum kit, I played the drum kit. And if I had to keep a tambourine going, or if I had to play some I was playing a lot. It was like Spider-Man, and it was on V drums.
Right? Oh, wow.
And Phil Collins was there every hour of that 29 hours. So here's what went down. Here's how lucky I am and how grateful I am. We're doing this, and I'm a nervous wreck playing drums for Phil Collins. He's in the room here, with 10 people in the cast, if that. 4 other musicians, Phil Collins, a bunch of Disney people, and they're trying to figure this out. There's a little bit of dialogue used as a through line in between Phil's amazing songs. I'm reading my ass off, like on 2 staffs, the percussion. I kind of made it work, so I knew what I was going to play so that it would work. I spent a lot of time on making it work. So I had the V drum kit with the drum cat and probably like 3 or 4 pads and a couple of pedals. It was like electronic madness. Doing the best I could. And Phil was there with his whole rig. He had like a rig of keyboards and his keyboard guy there. It was fascinating. So it was a Monday through Friday thing. On Thursday, I go into the 10 o'clock rehearsal. And Phil's hanging out by the drum set. And I talked to Phil Collins that week, and he was very friendly, very down-to-earth guy. And Phil's by the drums at 10 in the morning, and he's hanging out at the drum kit. I'm like, okay, he's at the drums. And I said, hey, Phil, how are you? And Phil says to me, he goes, Gary, guess what I did last night? I'm like, I don't know, Phil. What'd you do? He said, I went to Wicked. You saw Wicked last night? It's like, I saw Wicked last night. I said, well, how did you love it? Thinking that he's going to say, it was okay. He was over the moon about it. He loved it. He was in love with Aida. He loved the band. He said, you sounded incredible. I was like, well, man, Phil, really, thank you. But had I known you were there, I probably would have choked or something. But, he said, you really sounded great. It was so great to hear you in the theater. And I said, well, Phil, thank you for the compliment. But frankly, what I'm doing here in the room with you is so much more grooving, and it's your music. And, I'm playing so much more stuff. He said, no, man, I got to hear you hit the drums. I was like, yeah, but you're hearing me here. He's like, And this is really, this is a really insightful thing I'll never forget. He said, Gary, here you're playing on electronic pads. I have no idea what you sound like. And I was like, yeah, playing my heart. He's like, no, no, no. I have no idea how you sound on the drums. He wasn't impressed really with what I was doing, even though I was working so hard to impress him, playing all that stuff, in real time, drums and percussion. What he was impressed with was how the orchestra sounded and how the show landed and how it sounded in the house to him. I was amazed. I was like, wow, he heard me. Okay. Weeks can go by, the 29-hour thing stops. And we're like, what's next for Tarzan? Well, the next thing I hear is that they're going to do another workshop, but they don't know who's going to play drums. And I'm like, oh my God. And at the same time, Moving Out, the Billy Joel show, remember that show?
Yep.
Was playing at the Richard Rodgers Theater. And the drummer, whose name I can never remember, who's Billy Joel's drummer now, amazing drummer, Chuck Berge.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Chuck Berge was playing drums. And Chuck Berge was freaking out because Moving Out got a closing notice. And he loved having a Broadway show. And Chuck Berge felt, he was like, we're closing? Well, what's coming in? Somebody said, well, it's actually Tarzan, Phil Collins. Chuck Berge had replaced Phil Collins on Brand X. So Chuck reputedly said, well, I'm going to call Phil and tell him I want the job. So, not to pat myself on the back, but here's how this went down. I'm not kidding you. So this workshop at Tarzan's planned. I hear Chuck wants a job. I'm like, well, that's it. I'm done. And Paul Bogan said, well, I don't know. It's not over yet. And Phil Collins told them, say, look, I never heard Chuck play in a theater. The only guy I've ever heard play in a theater that I know I love the way he plays in the theater and what he plays, what he brings to the show from a theatrical point of view is Gary Seligson. I don't care who you put in the band, but I want that guy to play piano.
Wow, that's great.
I kid you not. That's how it went down. Luckily for me, because I felt like my head, I was really flattered and amazed, but at the same time, I knew that Chuck is a drummer, and I thought, oh man, Chuck's going to fucking kill me. But luckily, he got the gig with Billy Joel a few weeks after that. So he's been happy ever since.
Wow. That's amazing.
Anyway, so I left Wicked to do that because Phil Collins is my hero. There's so much drumming going on. How could I, and I guess I was, at that point I had one kid. Now I have two. And I was like, this will be okay. Tarzan, it's a Disney show. They thought it was going to be bigger than Lion King. They had really good hopes for it.
How long did it last?
It lasted for 14 months, 15 months. I probably worked for about a year and a half on it, maybe more. But it was the experience of a lifetime. But when that show closed, I had no shows, and I was stubbing for the next 14 months.
Did you go back to Wicked to sub?
Yes.
And what did it feel like?
Really weird, because I played it the way I played it, and Matt plays a little differently than me. I was like, and I asked the conductor, I was like,
can I play it my way?
Can I play? He's like, yeah, you wrote this thing. You play it. And they were forgiving. They let me play my way. And not that it's, please. He just had, Matt is a great drummer. Mm-hmm. He has a heavier foot than me. He's coming from a little different place in some ways.
Man, I don't know who has a heavier foot than you, man. I heard you play, man. It's funny how you have a history of playing jazz, but you play so heavily. I mean, you have a strong feel. Whether it's Aida or...
I like to play rock.
Yeah, and then, of course, we'll get to the School of Rock thing in a minute. And, of course, playing Ain't Too Proud.
I had 14 months of subbing. I mean, I was doing a bunch of stuff, and I was subbing. And then one day I got called to do Billy Elliot, which was great. And that lasted for about 3.5 years, maybe longer.
Oh, that's great.
It was amazing. And my second son was born at that point during that time. And then when that closed, that was Elton John, and really interesting experience too.
And Phil Collins and then Elton John. So tell me about Elton John.
It was Elton John, then Phil Collins, and then Elton John.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Ah.
What do you want to know?
Where, there are certain times where, it's funny you mentioned if somebody's in the audience, you might think and play differently. So meeting people like Elton John and Phil Collins, were you self-conscious? Were you like thinking, oh my God, this is a legendary, rock star? Or were you like, oh, this guy's cool, let me just work with him? Like, how did you approach it?
Well, I wish I could say I was that cool as a cucumber like that, but not really. With Elton John, I got to play with him 2 times. One he showed up in the rehearsal room for Aida early on, and I got to play a shuffle feel with him. We had played it for Elton. He was watching. He's like, not Gary. He was sat in the middle of the room, and then he started walking over to the bandstand. He said, "Actually, I think it should be a little faster." And then he kicked the piano player off the stool. Basically, he said, "Look, can I sit down?" And he played, a faster shuffle feel, and I played along with it. That was my strongest suit. That lasted for about 2 choruses. It was incredible. He's a force of nature when he plays, but he plays he has such a giant feel, giant sense of pulse and groove that basically he'll take you along. And I was like, well, I'm not going to get in the way of this. So I was playing some drums to his very strong piano feel. It's like, yeah, it should be this tempo. 20 points, 20 clicks fast. Phil Collins, I never got to play with him where he was playing, except when he was tapping a pencil on seriously, or clapping.
Oh, wow.
And singing, and that was amazing. And I got to listen to him tapping time with a pencil on the desk or his foot, tapping his foot. And I'm here to tell you that he has like the strongest sense of groove I've ever met, anybody I've ever met in my life. Like he can tap his foot, Clayton. Like here's a story. He was always, when we were rehearsing Tarzan, there's all this flying that goes around where they have to fly actors. And so it took months of rigging where the people are on harnesses, and Disney didn't want anybody to get hurt, of course. So we took months. And during the 10-week period, I didn't play a note, but I transcribed a lot of stuff. Yeah, I'm not kidding you. Until the last day. And then even that day, I barely played. But I would be in rehearsal, hanging out in the room where they were teaching the vocals. And Phil was there basically every day for 10 weeks or whatever. Always there. Phil Collins was there day in, day. He loved it. He comes from the theater. He was a child actor in London. And he loved the process. He was always there. He's the nicest guy. He's the mellowest guy you've ever liked. No airs about him, no ego. Incredible. Phil would be in the room where they were teaching vocal harmonies. The guy would be playing piano and teaching parts, and Phil would just be there to make sure people were not singing with too much vibrato, because he knew the music was not going to be about vibrato, even though it's a Broadway show, it's a pop show. And he would just be tapping time either with his foot on the floor or his head, just to kind of help the time in the room. Man, the whole room would be swaying. He was so strong, Clayton. His time feel is so strong. The air in the room felt differently when he would do that. He didn't try to do anything. He was just like listening and tapping his foot. But the groove was so wide.
Wow.
Incredible. Incredible.
Tell me more about Billy Elliot. Did you do the movie also?
No.
Okay.
Billy Elliot's an interesting story. That came to New York after it was already a hit in London. And when it came to New York, the album had already come out. They recorded it in London. So my direction was to play what was already created. I was to play it as it was.
Okay.
Unlike Aida and Wicked, there's a ton of Gary in those parts. There's hardly anything in the Broadway version. Not too much change for the Broadway version versus what was on the album. I played a tune called Electricity, where I added a double kick drum pedal. I thought that worked really well. There was a few little things, and that was a big thing. Oh, that Electricity and the song Angry Dance at the end of the first act is like a boogie that I played a double kick drum for the last chorus. That was not in London. But the drummer that recorded the album in London was not the guy that played the show. The guy that recorded the album is a guy named Ralph Sammons, Salmins, very famous London studio exec, Steve Gadd. Amazing drummer. He sounded, I just was like, well, what you played is, beautiful. All the big band stuff is great. So it's a big band. There's a lot of brass chorales. There's a lot of like military kind of stuff. There's a couple of rocky things with that boogie and, some classic kind of Elton stuff, but not as classic, I'd say, as the Aida.
That ran for 4 years, right? About?
Yeah, like 4 years, I think. Something around there. Yeah, it was amazing. I loved it.
There was a Broadway cast recording.
No, only the London cast recording.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And it's great.
That's cool.
It's a great show. I mean, the story is amazing. They thought it would run longer. They put a tour together, and they thought the tour would do really well. But what happened on the tour was it's a story about a kid in a coal mining town back in the 80s when the coal miners went on strike. And basically the whole town, everybody in the town works in the coal mines. Nobody has work. They're all on strike. Nobody's got any money. And one of the coal miners' sons is this 12 or 13-year-old kid who loves to dance. He's not gay, but he became a ballet dancer and he loves it. And the whole story ensues. I won't give it away, but basically what happened with that was the tour was put out. They were going to do like 5 months in Chicago, wound up running about 6 weeks. They couldn't sell tickets because middle America thought that the show was Billy Elliot, a show about a little gay dancer.
Oh, really? Wow.
They couldn't sell the tour because people were not interested in seeing an Elton John show about a gay ballet dancer. And basically, they poured so much money into that. They lost so much money with the tour that they gave up on the Broadway run. Basically, but they got 4 years of Broadway out of it. But that's really what happened.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
True story.
On to Motown the musical. You played percussion there.
Yeah. So Billy Elliot closed, and then I had again 14 months of subbing, and I went back to whatever I could and subbed a lot and did a lot of different workshops and things. Motown happened because Ethan Pop, the musical supervisor for Motown, I met doing Tarzan. He was the associate conductor on Tarzan. So he hired me to do one of the readings to play drums on, which was frightening for me, Barry Gordy. And then eventually they got Buddy Williams, which I'm really happy about, to play drums. And Ethan said, well, I can offer you the percussion chip. I said, sure, I'll do that. That's how that happened. Yeah, it was percussion. Very similar to what I did on Dreamgirls. A lot of tambourine. You were there. You played the tambourine. A lot of timpani, a lot of tambourine, some vibes, some xylophone.
Yes.
I had left off my mallet chops, and I did. I worked, for months playing scales and reading, getting my stuff back together, learning how the gospel tambourine thing.
Band was great, man. I love playing that show.
I know, and Roger Squatero was on.
Yes.
Book, and Roger.
Yes.
I love Roger Squatero. We were on Tarzan together. He was he and Javier Diaz. It was me and Javier Diaz and Roger.
When I did the workshop of Ain't Too Proud, it was just me and Kenny Seymour for the most part doing the choreography and the music. And then when we had the workshop, it was me, Keith Robinson, George Farmer, Roger, and Javier. And when I was playing with Roger and Javier, oh my God, I was playing what I was playing, but when they got together, their energy, they're so tight together. They just raised it up to a whole nother level.
Talk about Cloud 9, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. They're just, Cloud 9. Yeah. That groove at the very beginning. I'm like, oh my God.
Anything. I mean, Rod, those guys are so imagine playing Phil Collins' music. Jungle vibe.
Oh my God. That's something.
Oh man. I mean, that's why I took that gig. I mean, it was like, you raised off the floor. You're like levitating. The music was great.
Wow.
And those guys, the three of us, we had a ball. Yeah.
Amazing.
So fortunate to play with it.
And you went on to School of Rock.
My timing was great. Ethan Pop was hot, and so School of Rock somehow fell in his lap, and he asked me if I wanted to play drums on that. We did the workshop and stuff for that. Pre-Broadway run, and School of Rock was 3 years, I guess. It was amazing.
Yeah, I like that show. I took my kids there, and one of the guys actually went to middle school with my son, Matt, one of the guitar players. Can't remember his last name.
One of the kids in the band?
Yes.
On stage band? That's awesome.
Yep. And it was fun watching those drummers. I remember you would tell me about one of the drummers at
Raghav. He's amazing.
Yes.
He's all over the internet. He's teaching at Drumeo.
Really?
Raghav is a beast. And the other guys were great too. Don't get me wrong. The other 13-year-old wunderkind drummers that were there, Levi and the original guy, I don't think of his name right now.
Did they ever come down?
Raghav is a special. Drummers will learn about Raghav from now to the end of time. That's how it's special Raghav.
Wow.
He's got his head screwed out straight. He's been practicing umpteen hours a day since he was a little kid, recording himself, videoing himself since the beginning. There's YouTube videos of him from like age 5 or 4 all the way. He's amazing. He's got giant ears. He's humble. He's smart. He's got the right aesthetic. He's all that. I'm a giant fan. I love that guy.
It's great.
Everything good is with Raghav.
So one last thing, Mrs.
Sure.
Doubtfire.
Yes, here we are.
Did that open up yet? I mean, did it actually open and then close?
Previews in.
3 previews in?
We did 3 previews.
Oh my God, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm playing percussion there again. It's another Ethan Pop thing. So Ethan likes to hire me on percussion because if something happens to the drummer and he knows he can slide me over. So I think for him, it's like, well, he got Gary just in case.
Is Rodney on that one? Rodney Howard?
Yeah, Rodney Howard, he's great, killing it.
Yes. And that's the show that you're going back to.
I'm working on my mallet chops now, baby.
Do you have, out of all the musicals that you've done, do you have a favorite musical that you played in and why?
I guess it would, it's hard to name a favorite, but I can tell you Aida has so much of me in it, and it was a thrilling time for me. It was really, really creative. That was a thrilling experience. But Tarzan, as you heard, is a thrilling experience. Wicked absolutely has a lot of me in it too. That was thrilling. Totally. Billy Elliot was great. I mean, I don't know. I love them all. Working next to Buddy Williams every night. Honestly, his pocket and his tie feel. I learned so much playing next to him every night.
Yeah,
it's stuttering for him too, but he really turned my head around in a great way. I love that.
What advice would you give to anyone interested in playing Broadway musicals?
Okay, well, I guess I have to preface it by saying Broadway musicals have changed in the last 15 years. A lot of them, even some, maybe one would say most of them, are on a click track now, so that's a skill that everybody has. But at the same time, you better know how to, if you want to play on Broadway, I think you better have the wherewithal to, if you're doing something and there's no click there, to know how to hold the band together and be able to listen to your fellow section mates. It's a little different, if there's no click there, then all of a sudden the stakes are higher. And so that's one element for sure. What advice would I give? As a percussionist, drummer, play as many different styles as you can, because if you really want to play on Broadway, you never know what, every show is a different pocket of, there's different styles. The difference between Rent and Jekyll and Hyde, or Rent and Tarzan, or Les Miserables, which I played for 5 years, is very orchestral. The Saigon, very orchestral. They're all different. So my advice would be to gain as much musical breadth as you can. More advice would be really pay attention to the conductor and understand that they're usually the only ones that can see the show from the front. So their responsibility, you have to have that in mind, I think. You're sitting at the drum chair, even though you're driving the bus, and really maybe the ball's in your court in a way, because the drums supply a lot of heart and energy and momentum to the show. The person conducting, watching the show, playing keyboards, watching the show, has a singular, is the only one with that viewpoint of what's really going on. So if you're tuned out to the extent that you're not really aware of what the conductor has on his plate in real time, moment to moment. In other words, if you're not really in tune to him to some high degree, you're setting yourself up for potential disaster. I mean, things could be happening on stage. People could be stopping, and you could miss a. Things can really go wrong. It's very much happening. It's conducted in real time. It's played in real time, whether there's a click track or not, man. It is being played. So you better pay attention to the conductor, and you need to have that skill and that awareness to be able to do that. So my advice to you is, if you're playing a show, know the show really well so that you can take your mind off the book, look at the conductor, be aware of what he or she is going through, and then listen and play the show. And keep in mind the action and the storytelling, because playing a Broadway show or playing a theatrical show is just that. It's not playing in a band with your band. It's a theatrical experience, it's a story being told. And you're a cog in the wheel of the story that's being told in real time. And because you're the drummer, you're supplying the heartbeat, the passion, the emotion, whether it's a triangle is quietly, beautiful triangle ting with the orchestra, or if you're throwing down playing School of Rock with kids jamming on stage in the rock, it's all of the above.
What are some things that
Be on time? That's another one.
What are things that a Broadway drummer should never do in a Broadway pit?
Should never do. If you're subbing for someone, be aware of what the environment is when you get into the drummer's space. And if you need to alter it, first of all, don't alter it much, meaning the snare drum angle. And if you have to change the seat height, try to get it back to where it was. Because there's nothing worse than if I get delayed on the train or I'm running in and I get it there and the first tune is a big tune. And if I sit down, it's like, wait, I feel that's not cool. It's also not cool to leave your coffee cup, Coke can, newspapers. Don't leave it a mess, man. Don't leave it a mess. Go back to the area and go back to how you found it, basically. Have respect for the environment.
What are things that a drummer should always do playing Broadway shows?
Be aware of just what I said before, that it's a theatrical experience. You have to know the show well enough to keep your eyes on the conductor almost at all times. You have to realize that it's not about you. It's about the cohesiveness of the theatrical experience. You're in charge of the rhythm section, maybe not in charge, but you're there to help that happen. Be always aware of it. Have your antenna way out, way open.
What kind of drums do you use? And sticks, cymbals, heads?
I'm a Pearl endorser for a long time now.
Now, why Pearl and not Sonar or Yamaha?
Good question.
DW.
To be honest with you, I had a Slingerland endorsement, and Slingerland for a few years there was owned by Gibson, and then Gibson kind of dropped Slingerland. And so when Aida was happening, I knew I needed a drum set. I could use Elton John's clout to get an endorsement. And Slingerland could not furnish a drum set for me in New York at that point because Gibson had kind of dropped the ball and wasn't interested. So, and I was already with ProMark drumsticks. And my rep at ProMark said, you need drums, man. I know everybody. What do you want? Pearl, Yamaha? I was like, well, Pearl would be great. And he basically said, okay, let me call XYZ. You call him. That's how it works. Elton John and Disney and a Broadway show looming was enough for Pearl to say, yes, great. And you teach too.
Did they give you a set or they
gave me a set? No, not for free. The set that I used was we bought it, at artist cost. Actually Disney bought that drum set, and I bought a drum set. I wish I could have kept that Aida drum set.
Is that what you have in your studio now? A Pearl drum set?
No, I have Billy Elliot's. I have a bunch of different drums, but the set here now is a Pearl reference series that I used on Billy Elliot.
And the drums that I saw you play in School of Rock, they were Pearl also, correct?
Yeah, and School of Rock producers wanted to keep that drum kit, which I'm bummed about because I love it.
What do they do with it?
I don't know. Producers have it. It's in a warehouse somewhere collecting dust.
Cymbals too?
No, those are my cymbals.
And what do you use?
I've been with Sabian for a long time.
A lot of my colleagues like Sabian cymbals.
I do love Sabian. So much variety, and I've never run into a situation where I wished I had something.
Wow.
They were really nice to me through the year. They've been great.
I read on your bio, now I might have read something incorrect like I did last few minutes ago, but you played with AC/DC?
I worked with the singer, percussionist at Wicked, that works with Matt. He was involved in a show out of Chicago called Helen of Troy. They did a workshop. And Brian Johnson, singer with it. Brian Johnson, believe it or not, was involved in writing the book and writing the music for that show. So it's a rock show. And we did a performance of it down at a club in the village. Ian Espinosa was in it. They had a cast. We did like 2 performances maybe. And I got to play with him because he sang, man.
Wow.
He sang on one tune. That
That's
was
cool.
amazing. It was wild. Wow.
I thought you got it, I thought you took Phil.
No. He didn't
Phil
take
Rudd's
Brian
place.
Johnson did not take me on the road. I got to play in a concert in New York with him where Brian Johnson sang 2 of his own tunes and I was playing drums. Yes. It
That's
was
cool.
great.
For anyone that wants to find out more about you, where can they find you? Social media, website?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram. I don't pay attention too much. I don't usually post things. I should. I'm on Facebook. My name there is good. I have my website. My website is outdated. People can find me there. Gary at GarySeligson.com. They can email me.
You teach lessons?
Yeah. Here and there, I do. Yes, when I can. I love it. I love to teach.
Thank you. It's very interesting to learn the backstories of things and why you went from certain shows to certain. I didn't know before you got to Broadway, you had done so much touring. That's amazing.
Yeah. And usually what they say about people that go on a Broadway show tour is that, well, you become a touring musician and you're stuck with it. In my case,
is that the case? Do you think that's the case nowadays?
it could happen. I don't know about nowadays. I feel like everything's shifted with COVID and things are really wide open now. There's a lot of different things happening. Like I feel like Broadway's changing for a lot of reasons, the whole equity amongst, it's just changing, it's changing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, man. I love touring. It worked out well for me. I feel like I got very lucky. Right place, right time, but right skill set.
Yes.
Gary Chester, when he asked me if I wanted to play on Broadway, I think he knew that I might have the right personality for it and the right backgrounds for it, which is why he asked me. It dawned on me about 3 years into all the touring. It's like, man, you know what? I'm doing this day in and day out. If I look back at who I am as a musician and like what my schooling was, I'm really doing the right gig because I come from the classical world. I played a lot of drum set and there's a lot of that and I played with a lot of orchestras and, this is a good fit for me. So I feel like I got lucky. It wasn't my go-to, if you were to ask me in music school what my hope and dream would have been, it would have been to be a studio musician or maybe a timpanist in an orchestra.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. But the cards didn't, when I started studying with Gary Chester, and he said, you want to play percussion and drums. Then I became more of a drummer. And then I think it was kind of pushed in that direction, but I wound up doing everything. I'm playing percussion now. So very lucky, very fortunate, very grateful.
That's great. Well, thank you for joining me on the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast, and nice talking to you, and we will see each other in person.
Yeah, man. I can't wait.
Sooner than later.
Thanks, Clayton. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Be well, bro.
All righty.
Ciao.